Lord Campbell of Croy stood up in the House of Lords and asked the government to stop a video game from reaching British shelves. May 20th, 1997. He'd never played it. Nobody in that chamber had. Within months, the studio behind it would fold his own words into a radio ad. He thought he was protecting children. He was handing the smallest game studio in Scotland the best advertising campaign money could never buy. That moment is chapter 3 of this story, not chapter 1. Before any of that happened, 4 friends from a computer club in Dundee had to build a company nobody outside Scotland had ever heard of. Another empire, another case. Here's what really happened. David Jones, Mike Daly, Russell Kay, and Steve Hammond met as teenagers at the Kingsway Amateur Computer Club in Dundee, Scotland, starting around 1983. Daly was the youngest, just 14, showing up in 1984 with a Commodore Plus 4 he'd gotten for Christmas. Jones lost his job at the Timex factory in Dundee, the same factory, as it happened, that manufactured Sinclair's ZX Spectrum computers. There's a real irony buried in that layoff. Timex itself had funded programming courses at the local technical college, the same college that hosted the computer club where Jones met the friends who'd become his company. He used his redundancy money to buy an Amiga 1000 and started coding a shooter called Menace on it, under a working title, CopperCon 1, a programmer's name pulled from the Amiga's own Copper graphics hardware. During development, the team took a tape recorder to a Dundee arcade and captured temporary sound effects from a Konami Salamander cabinet Jones loved. It's not clear how much of that raw recording actually survived into the finished game. Menace sold roughly 20,000 copies in 1988. That was enough. Jones founded DMA Design that same year, hiring Daly as his first employee, with Kay and Hammond following as core early staff. The name itself meant almost nothing. DMA stood for Direct Memory Access, a technical Amiga term Jones simply liked the sound of. He'd later joke it really stood for doesn't mean anything. Not co-founders in any legal sense, just 4 friends from the same computer club, one of them now signing the paychecks. The company's first office sat above a fish and chip shop in Nethergate, arranged through Jones' father-in-law, who owned the place downstairs. 3 years later, one offhand comment in that office, not from Jones, but from Russell Kay, would turn into the best-selling game most people have never connected to what this studio became. Kay looked at an early prototype animation and said there was a game in that. The prototype became Lemmings, released Valentine's Day, 1991. It sold roughly 20 million copies across 21 platforms, and that money gave DMA something most studios never get: the freedom to fail on purpose. By 1994, Mike Daly was already experimenting with a new overhead driving engine. The formal project began April 4th, 1995, under the name Race and Chase. The plan called for an 18-month production schedule. It took nearly 3 years. Here's what most retellings get wrong. The popular story says a single glitch, police cars turned violently aggressive by a pathfinding error, single-handedly invented Grand Theft Auto out of a boring racing game. The glitch was real. DMA's creative director, Gary Penn, has described it directly. Police cars trying to drive straight through the player's car, ramming it off the road. The team loved it, and they kept it. But the design document from March 1995, months before the bug ever showed up, already included car theft, police pursuit, and bank robbery missions playable from both sides of the law. The bug didn't invent the idea of crime or pursuit. It revealed which already planned idea was actually fun to play. The game that would become one of the most controversial products in entertainment history wasn't controversial by accident. Someone was about to make sure of that on purpose. Publisher BMG Interactive hired Max Clifford, a British publicist already known for manufacturing tabloid scandals. Sam Hauser, working at BMG at the time, fully embraced the plan. David Jones, DMA's founder, reportedly had real reservations about generating controversy just for attention. Clifford's plan worked exactly as designed. On May 20th, 1997, Lord Campbell of Croy a former Secretary of State for Scotland, formally asked the government whether it would act against the game's release. A government minister responded that the game hadn't even been submitted for classification yet. BMG's marketing team later folded clips from that exchange directly into radio advertising. When tabloids went looking for a face to attach to the outrage, DMA's writer and PR contact Brian Baglow stepped forward to shield Jones from the spotlight. News of the World ran a story branding him the sick car game boss, built almost entirely around a minor accident where his car brushed a tree and an old driving ban from years earlier. None of that outrage was really about protecting anyone. It was free advertising, and it was about to prove itself. Grand Theft Auto reached European PCs in late November 1997. Early corporate accounts credited it with roughly 500,000 copies sold and £25 million in business. But that was only an early milestone, not the full story. Take-Two later confirmed more than 1 million copies shipped across PC and PlayStation combined. Later reporting placed the game's real reach somewhere between 3 and 6 million copies by the early 2000s. A small Scottish studio that started above a chip shop had built something the controversy alone could never fully explain. Just months before that November launch, Gremlin Interactive had already acquired DMA Design outright. The friends who built the studio were about to find out what happens to a small team once bigger companies start deciding its future. You now know how a government official trying to ban a video game ended up advertising it for free, and how a glitch everyone credits with inventing Grand Theft Auto was really just the moment DMA found the idea they'd written down months earlier. The controversy made Grand Theft Auto visible. It never protected the people who built it. By the time the series had become valuable enough to reshape an industry, DMA Design no longer belonged to friends who started it above a chip shop. That's the next case file. Another empire, another case. Here's what really happened.